Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast. This is a weekly half-hour program focused on the relevant topics in Freemasonry and the various aspects of the craft. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, editor-in-chief of CraftsmanOnline.com, and joining us this week, his worshipful brother, Luis Gonzalez, who's the worshipful master of Odenton Lodge number 209 in Odenton, Maryland. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, brother.
Thank you for having me, brother. I'm excited. We had our conversation, and now I'm here, and hopefully we can shed some light, and, maybe the brothers listening can maybe learn a little bit or two, and then we can learn from each other. So I'm excited. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. I'm excited to be able to share your passion with the rest of the craft, and I hope our listener is ready for it this week as we talk about the movement that's happening in Freemasonry, and that's from one generation to the next generation of the next Masonic leaders. And there's a push to kind of return to some of the older traditions and practices, but have a modern interpretation of it. And worshipful brother Luis Gonzalez is here to share how he's been able to do this in his lodge and encourage it in your lodge. But let's start with the visit. I got a chance to visit Odenton Lodge last month and was totally captivated with the energy and passion that you have for the craft. So just so that our listener gets a chance to know you, brother, why did you join Freemasonry? What led you to go to the door and give those 3 knocks?
To me, it started when I was 16. I was doing a project for history on the Crusades and came across the Knights Templar, right? So I remember seeing them and talking about how they were a secret society. And then I saw that the book wasn't really historical fact, right? It was more of the secret society and the brotherhood. And I saw the square and compass. And then I remember, my father has a couple friends that wear the square and compass. And, I see some of them that hang out at this panaderia, right? Like it's like a coffee shop where you buy your pan con mantequilla, which is, bread and butter and your coffee as you're going to work or school in my case, right? And so as a good 16-year-old would do, I, with no decorum whatsoever, stopped an elder, right? And said, "Excuse me, ¿qué eso?" Like, what is that? And pointed at his ring, and immediately he went from a happy-go-lucky guy that I saw every day to complete seriousness and said, that's something that's none of your business. Essentially, when you actually become a true man, right? And he used some colorful language in Spanish, right? Then you can talk to me, but not earlier than when you're 21, and then maybe I'll talk to you, or another one of my brothers will, right? So I went to my father and said, "Hey, what's up with so and so?" Like, he's like, "What are you doing? How dare you go and talk about that? That's something that's not talked about. That's that's super serious." And then he kind of likened it to, this is like the mafia, but of good men, right? And they take it very serious. So fast forward, almost 10 years exactly, right? So another 9 years, and I'm in the Marine Corps. I'm out smoking, and I see what, later became my brotherly Linder. And I saw the same thing, square and compass ring, and I waited for everybody to leave, and I said, "What's that, and what can you tell me about it," right? And a year passed of us talking everything but Masonry. We talked about philosophy, theology, our families, what we like to do. And then he finally gave me a petition, and then I found myself knocking at the door of Odenton Lodge, number 209 in Maryland, right? And that was a very interesting experience, right? First of all, my name was pronounced Luis Jesus Gonzalez. And I just shook my head as I'm in the, in the preparation room. I'm like, this isn't going to go well. All right, well, I'll start getting dressed. But no, it was great. Welcome with open arms, and here I am, literally 16 years. In June, it was 16 years since I've been raised.
The cool things, it probably didn't feel it at the time, especially when you're like 16. I can't think of any young people who have ever spotted, a Masonic ring or anything on me, except my son, who always asks, like, "Dad, why do you wear a skirt?" And I'm like, "It's not a skirt, son. It's an apron. It's an apron." But your dad actually kind of was the first to create, and his friend were the first to create value in membership. And like, you can't just get this given to you. You have to be deserving of having it.
And then even when I petitioned and I told my mom and my dad, my dad was all about it. But more importantly, like my grandfather, who's 95, he's actually be here. When my mom told him, "Oh, Luisito's going to become un mason," ¿verdad? My grandfather, he said, "Oh, that's where real men are." Literally, that was his word. He goes, "That's great, because that's where real men are. And that stuck and resonated with me, how serious and how, with reverence that, my grandfather's not a Mason. My grandfather was a Rosicrucian, right? But my grandfather's old school, right? Like the man still gets dressed in a suit to go out and go buy bread and stuff, right? Wears a fedora, opens the door, very chivalry, right? Like a very old school mentality. And how to hear that from him, a man that I respect, right? It's like, man, this is the epitome of what a man is, right? And he's like, no, that's what real men are. Man, so that solidified it again on top of what I heard from my father and just how I saw the Masons interact where they were super close, right? Like tight. So to hear that, I was like, man, this is amazing that I'm actually going to get the opportunity to maybe join and petition and get accepted, right? And I'm glad. And I like I said, I don't do anything that's not, I give 100%, right? For everything I do. So that passion and that respect that I saw my grandfather, who's not a Mason, give the craft, right? And then the way that my father and those men, I didn't know them. I don't even remember their names, right? It's something that I'm like, well, this is what Masonry really is about. And then obviously later on you start studying and you realize, wow, this is how it is. And you visit other lodges and you talk to other brothers that come from like Puerto Rico, South America. And it's not a social club. It's literally una hermandad, a family, right? It's like a brotherhood, and they mean it.
Beautifully captures and gives me background to the wonderful conversation that we had. I felt like, it was 10 minutes long and I'm like, wow, I got to get going. I got work tomorrow. Because one of the things you talked about, which, I'm always fascinated, getting to travel to different jurisdictions and see how the ritual's done, the certain aspects of the craft. You got a chance to visit a Cuban Masonic lodge. Well, you tried to gain admittance into a Cuban Masonic lodge when you went to New Jersey. Tell us about that experience.
Right. So going back to, the first thing I did as soon as I was raised, I'm like, oh man, now I can go and see the same guys that told me when I was 16, right? They come back when you're a man. So I was 25. I just got raised and I went to the same little coffee shop where I knew they hung out. And they told me, yeah, the Masonic lodge is down there in the corner. Go open the door and I see like a bar, right? I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And I go, well, I'm a Mason and I'm looking. And all of a sudden, this old gentleman comes over and a bunch of people. And when they say duly tried and examined, I was literally taken through the ringer. Like I told them, I don't know anything in Spanish, but if we want, I could try to translate as best as possible. And I'm talking about, we went through every question, things that they asked me, things that that you're not even taught in catechism. Like in order for you to know, you have to have gone to the source. Here's an example, and I'll give a little nugget. The password's mother. And I'll leave it at that. And I'm like, mother, what do you mean? Right? So I was like, okay. So it was real deep. Eventually I got up and I went up and I got to see it. And to think that the lodge, I found out it was like a red ritual, right? I also found out, I'm glad that I didn't actually sit for a meeting because, well, it was a clandestine lodge. I didn't know that. Right? So, but yeah, it was amazing. Like everything that you can think of, super esoteric, everything painted. But then the greatest part of it all, though, of my experience was that as soon as they knew I was for real, it was like the world opened up. That was it. I could have, hey, what do you want? What do you need? Here you are, blah, blah, blah. You're a brother. Hanging out. Like they showed me in the back room. They like literally did, how we untile the door? When their back room, they did the thing, untiled, and a false room opened up and there were Masons back there playing dominoes and Cubans playing dominoes and smoking cigars. I'm like, what is going on?
So every lodge I've been to has that room. What are you talking about?
Now you're truly one, right? And we know that you're one. And so we're going to treat it that way. And then I found out that part of them are now what remnants of that lodge that I had visited later on became what's called Sons of Liberty Lodge in under the New Jersey jurisdictions. And I guess what ended up happening is some wanted to go mainstream and some just wanted to stay doing their thing, right? So it was just such a surreal experience, right? Because they take it serious. But and it was a genuine, like, oh, you really are one of us. And then that was it. It was like, no questions asked, right? It didn't seem forced or fake, if that makes sense.
It is interesting how in different cultures, I would say Freemasonry is embraced or even like ingrained in that culture. Not to say that in other cultures it's not valued in the same way, but it's just, when you say that you're a man and that you're a Mason, like you were saying, people do give you that higher regard and that higher respect
immediately
of the principles. Yeah. The choices you've made in kind of how you're going to live your life. And it kind of sets me up for the next question because, you had this interest in the craft when you were 16. You go off and you serve the country, and thank you for doing that. You come back, you finally are a man, at least to your dad's standards, so that you can go knock on the door.
Yep.
You become a Mason, and you're now the worshipful master of your lodge, but yet you didn't step right into the officer line. You let some years pass. Tell us about that, like your belief in being a leader and, whether it's a part in a degree or taking a chair in a lodge. When is the right time for you to do that?
What I really enjoyed is at the time, it was past master Lindabar, rest in peace, right? He was actually the master in 2005, but in 2006, right, I was raised in June of 05. And then past master Tom Keller, right, he's actually, he was the master that year, right? And what he did is if you wanted to join the lodge, you had to show up to every practice, period. Right. And so that fit right in with what I was taught, right? It's serious and you got to go. Right? So I'll never forget myself and brother Eric Cagle. We showed up every single practice and just sat there. So eventually, became a junior steward, senior steward, went through all the chairs. I even was chaplain. The only chairs that I didn't do were secretary and treasurer. But during that time I deployed, right? I went and deployed. There was a year in 08 where I was living in Iowa. And then I went back to wherever they needed me, right? And I always took it as I'm doing this because I'm serving the lodge, right? It's not a matter of a title. I even served as a warden twice, junior warden twice. And there was a time I exemplified in the degrees back in 2014, and I could have been master, right? But I always removed myself, right? Even if they nominated for senior warden one time, I said, nope.
Now, why would you do that? Why?
To me, I could have taken it and shown up to, one every other meeting or 1 month I can't make. That's not what it's about, right? Because to me, what's that title, right? That title doesn't mean anything when you walk out the door, right? So yes, amongst the brother, I'm a worshipful master for this year, right? And then God willing, I'll become a past master once I'm done with my year, right? But what does that mean? That's only important, if at all, to the brothers, right? When I walk out that door, I'm still Luis Gonzalez. I'm just another human being. I'm a citizen of my town, my country, and a global citizen, right? So a title doesn't do anything, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything. It's what you give to it, right? And that's my perspective. Just recently, actually, we founded a new Spanish lodge, right? So Naciente number 242. I was offered to become part of their board, right? The board of directors for their lodge. I turned it down in front of everybody. How beautiful would that have been? Not only was he a founding member, but he was also on the very first board. But it's not the right thing to do, right? I got up and I said, it was an honor. Thank you for nominating, but I have to decline because I've been voted as worshipful master of Odenton, and that necessitates 100% of my time.
I've often felt the same way when people ask, why don't you come join the York Rite or get into the Scottish Rite? And when I was first starting my Masonic career, I was like, I use this line. I had heard it from another older brother. If it fits, take it for yourself. But I always would say, I just want to be the best Blue Lodge Mason that I can be right now. And then I'll get to that point. Just knowing that those other things are waiting there. I think it would be tempting for a lot of guys, especially for somebody that had such a passion or interest at a young age to become a Mason and then be considered to be the master of the lodge. And a lot of guys would be like, yeah, I could do that. I could, quote unquote, do that for a year. That would be my year.
Yep.
Your principles is what drew me to want to have this conversation with you, is that, you're one of the guys that believe that, Freemasonry is a sacred space for intellectuals that want to talk about, the ancient histories of time. If you want to get into the deeper meanings of some of this is what you're all about. And I'm curious, like, when did you realize that there are men who are coming to your lodge who aren't getting that experience that they thought they were going to get when they first had an interest in Freemasonry?
It's funny because it happened to me. Right? So, and it's not a knock on anybody in particular. It's just the nature of the game, right? And the situation as it was. I'm looking and I'm like, okay, so we keeps using this word that says we make men better, right? We make good men better. But we're not talking about any way that we can sharpen our tool sets, right? Or that we can, we're the rough stone, right? So where are you giving me this chisel, and how are we chiseling away so that I can become better? How am I learning from you? Why are we not having deep discussions? Why are we not hanging out outside a lodge? We call each other brother, but I never see you unless it's in a lodge, right? I'm coming here to lodge and all I hear is minutes. Well, I don't need to hear the minutes because I was at the meeting last time, and all we did the last was read the minutes of the last meeting, right? So how are we making good men better? And that's literally how it started, right? Maybe I had this idealization of what Masonry was, right? From my father and the people that were surrounded, of this ancient fraternity that has all these secrets, right? That it guards and that it protects. And it's where real men are, and good men and gentlemen and all. And then I'm seeing that people just knock on the door and they're like, oh, here's a petition and I'll sign it. I don't even know you. But then you never see them again, right? And I'm like, wait, what are we doing, right? I saw great lodges that were fellowship and social, but I didn't really see a lot of good men making better. And all I kept saying, well, you get out of Masonry what you put into Masonry. But all I kept seeing was minutes of the last meeting, right? I got a family. I'm young, a professional. If I'm going to give time, right, then it has to be worth it, right? One of my biggest pet peeves is that I felt like we were moving towards, quantity, not quality. And quality, I don't want to be misunderstood, doesn't mean that you have to be an academic or a person that's only into the esoteric, or you have to be of some sort of social economic status. No, I don't care. You could be a homeless man and have that internal quality, but you want to better yourself and you got something to share, because we're all important, right? But it's not about quantity. And you realize, and I saw it in the numbers, right? And then people were like, well, people just don't show up, right? But what are you giving them? I want to be a Mason. I go online. What are you going to see when you go online? All these articles and all these things that talk about how ancient and esoteric and the secret knowledge and secret society and all these other images of skulls and this and that. And then reality hits. You go and you encounter none of it, right? And I'm like, okay. And then we have this wonderful, beautiful ritual, right? A wonderful, beautiful ritual. And I realized that most people don't even know what they're saying, and nobody's practicing it. And there's no action. We say these words in the lodge, but then it's not being done, right? So I said, okay, wait a second. If I ever become, I'm going to strive to, one, empower the brothers. Two, let's give value, right? Value to the craft, protect it, right? And then let's bring the ritual to life, right? That's literally what I want, because it's what I wanted. And I don't believe in the mentality of, well, it wasn't like that for me, right? That should motivate you to make it better for the next generation, right, and the next generation, right? So that's kind of where my mentality was. But I would not, and when I was able to have the time, I came back, I integrated myself back into the lodge. I was fortunate enough to be elected senior warden last year, right? And then I just started slowly trying to implement, and I had the backing of the master that was sitting master, right? And then, I created a wages program.
I want to talk about the wages program because, being a traveler, well-versed in New York ritual, and we get to that point of the meeting and you say, okay, brothers, go over to the senior warden station. It's time to get your wages. And I'm like, they're going to bust out some corn, wine, and oil? Like, what's going on here? And all of a sudden he opens up this bag with, fake pennies. I don't know what you want to, what the term is you want to use for them. And he hands me one and I'm like, well, this is Definitely one of the most unique things I've ever gotten in my life before. And an older brother's like, if you get a couple more of those, you can trade them in. And I'm like, for what? And you can use them to get lodge pins and other collectible items from the lodge, which I was like, this is really special. This is a great way to get your merchandise out to your brothers, reward them for coming, give some attendance, something to look forward to, aside from the Masonic education. And it really does build that brotherhood, because when you're sitting downstairs or afterwards outside with the guys in the parking lot having the conversation, and you're looking across and you're like, wow, I can tell he comes to the meetings because he's got the silver pen, he's got the gold pen, and these are status symbols within the brotherhood.
So I came up with this idea, and I'm probably sure that I'm not the only one that's come up with some form of program like this, but I came up with, based on the principles of the second degree. I remember listening in Prince Hall Masons, a lot of them will try to say, hey, do you got change for 15 cents?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's kind of how they're asking, and and then you answer. The idea is, if we had a lodge dinner, instead of paying the fee, just turn those coins in and your dinner's free. So I wrote the rules, which I'm willing to share with anybody, right? And how the program. I go to Michael's and I buy like these little discs, right? That maybe cost, I don't know, maybe $5 for like, I think it's like $5 or $8 for 20 or 30.
Genius, dude. Genius. You did something simple like that. And that's, to someone who hasn't heard that idea, revolutionary. They're like, oh, that's the greatest idea ever. And then, but wait, there's more. You did something that I have only been to one other lodge that actually has this. And it's one of the things that is, when you're first coming into the craft, you've heard of this room, you can't wait to see what it's about or learn what it's about. And we call it the Chamber of Reflection. It's probably one of the most esoteric parts of a lodge, I guess, literally outside of the lodge room. It's connected. And the whole thought of this is that you go into this space, and as a candidate who's going to go through the degrees, this is where you're supposed to sit there and just kind of reflect and think about your motivations for wanting to be in Freemasonry or going through these next couple of degrees, like you're playing it out in your head. They're decorated a certain way. So I want you to share how you created your Chamber of Reflection at Odenton Lodge, but then also how you were able to do this with the guidance and the permission of your Grand Lodge.
Right. So I got to credit my the previous past master for me, right? So my education officer and I one day were talking, and we're deep into the esoteric, and we like the philosophical stuff, and just having deep discussions. Right? Around the world, a lot of places Masonry has. So, for example, you go to the Dominican Republic, anywhere you go, there's a chamber. You go to Puerto Rico, 90% or 80% of the lodges have chambers because they do red ritual, right? Anywhere there's a French rite ritual, you go to DC, you can go to La France Lodge, they have a chamber, right? And they do the red ritual, right? More esoteric in a sense, a little bit more esoteric and symbolism than the York ritual that we normally follow here, right? You go to Louisiana, there's chambers, right? We're sitting there, we're spitballing, we're like, man, wouldn't it be great if we take that rinky-dinky closet where we just have to sit there and change and do their thing, right? Then they proceed to start the degree, and we just decorate. I wonder how that would go. So I called the master. I said, hey, he already knows that I've read the Constitution in and out. Here's what I think we could do. And it could just be decoration, right? So my grand inspector, I remember talking, he's like, I don't want to talk. Don't let me know. I was like, don't worry. I will never do anything that would get us in any kind of trouble, right? So we talked about it, but we said it has to be done right. It cannot be foo-foo. It cannot be cheap, because then that's garbage, right? So, and by that, I mean, don't go out and get Halloween props, right? And stuff like that, because that is absolutely, don't do it at all.
It cheapens the experience. Yeah.
Long story short, we had a degree coming in, right? An EA degree. And we had 2 weeks, and I said, okay, you know what? Let's just do it. So we ran in there, we painted the room. I bought paint, we painted the room. And then we started searching and, went and got original type. I don't know how deep I can go in.
You could talk about the symbols. Yeah, that's fine.
And I got all the chemical stuff. And then I went and Brother Shane, the education officer, he went and built this board, and I painted it, and then I took permanent chalk and drew all the chemical symbols and the writing. Anyway, we did it right. And we put it up. And of course, all the other brothers that have never experienced this or never traveled outside were like, what is going on? But they loved it. So the way we did it is like, hey, that's just our decoration. Sit there. We don't mention it. We don't say anything about it. Just sit there. Well, we did that once last year, and it went well, right? Well, then I became master. I was like, no, this is going to happen every single time. It just so happens that the first time I'm doing the degree, the Grand Master of Maryland, the Deputy Grand Master, and everybody shows up. I'm like, and everybody's like, are you going to decorate the room? Are you going to do the room? And I said, I would not do anything that I would, in other words, I believe in it. I won't do anything that I'm going to hide. Why? That's not true to Masonry either, right? Like the tenets is truth, right? So first thing I do is I show Master and the Grand Master. I said, Grand Master, I need to show you something. And I opened the room and they're like, man, this guy's either going to lose his card right there. Something's going to happen. And he thought it was absolutely wonderful. You're the only lodge that's doing that and you're doing it right. And absolutely wonderful. Again, he also has a lot of that experience, right? The esoteric knowledge. He's deep into that. He takes Masonry very seriously, right? Our current Grand Master. And I love that, right? So when he saw that, it kind of said, you know what? I'm doing it right. Another thing that we added is trestle board. I draw my own trestle board out of chalk. He thought this is not anything luminary. This is just bringing it back to how it was.
It's just doing it. That's really what it is. Yeah.
Can I explain everything in that room? Absolutely. Right. That's another thing that I would say. If you're going to try to do that, then you got to be willing to explain, right? If somebody then asks you, wait, well, what does this symbol mean? Why do you have salt? Why do you have sulfur, right? Why do you have a cockerel or a rooster, right? Well, that's Mercury, because that's the symbol of Mercury. If you can't explain it, and if you can't explain what salt is versus mercury versus sulfur, right? Like, so salt, right, is the soul, right? Mercury stands for the body, right? And sulfur is the body, and then mercury is kind of your mind, right? So mind, body, and soul, right? Those are the chemical. When you see the word vitriol, right? In Latin, it stands for visita inter terre, right? And then rectificando insieme occultum lapidem. Essentially, it says visit the internal land, earth, right? Go within the internal earth and rectifying it. There you will find a hidden stone. All it's saying is look within yourself, right? Know thyself, right? So we have a mirror. It says, know thyself. We have an hourglass, right? We have the skull. But you have to be able to, as the master, if you're going to at least put that in, or your education officer, you got to be able to explain those deep meanings, right? Everything has meaning. It's not just a prop, in other words. It's not there to decorate. It's there to instill subconsciously these thoughts in that candidate while he's sitting there and reflecting it. Not only that, but you're going to join something that's for life, right? It's serious.
I'm looking at it this way. It's not just a prop. It's exactly doing what it's supposed to do. It's preparing this man to go through the door.
For the journey.
That's the real challenge. Is you got to make sure on the other side of that door,
right,
ritual is on point. Brothers are there, focused, ready, on point.
The lodge is a temple. It's not a meeting. It's a temple, right? And one of the things that I do before I open is I let the brothers know, and I say, hey, everybody clear your mind for a second. And let's prepare ourselves for the work that we have in hand, remembering that this is a temple. Whether you go to church, mosque, temple, whatever, you're not there listening to music and hanging out. No, that's outside. Now you're entering sacred space. So one of the things that the brothers have been on board and they love it is, okay, now it's time to get serious, right? This is a sacred space, right? An example of that is that during the degree, mind you, like part of the halfway, people just, it was great, but people automatically, and I, as the master, said, no, I don't care who you are. I don't care if it's the Grand Master. There's no clapping right now. One, we're still in a degree. Two, we're still in the temple. We can congratulate ourselves on a great job that the line did and all of that afterwards. But right now, this moment is not for us. It's for that candidate. Like I said, bring the ritual to life and practice the ritual. If you're not willing to bring it to life and practice it, we're live action role players, right? If we're not going to do this right.
And this is the part that's cool, is that the lodge that I visited in upstate New York that does this, they base themselves off of TO, traditional observant masonry.
Yeah.
And they have a chamber of reflection. And before you come into the lodge, they have sage. It's only illuminated by candlelight. They play organ music where you come in and it's just like, okay, it really sets the tone of we're not here to talk about the roof or the sidewalk outside.
Mm-mm.
We're in here to use our minds as living stones like we're supposed to and come together.
And empowering the brothers. Like one of the things right before I took over is I did a survey. I said, what do you want from your lodge? Because at the end of the day, it's not what I want. See, that's what people don't understand. It's not the master's lodge. It's the brothers' lodge. The master's there to serve. Right. And I think that's also a difference in how we think about things. People think, oh, well, I'm a warden or I'm a this. Right. You're a servant of your brothers because they put you there to serve. If we think about it from the grand architect of the universe serves us every day, provides us with everything, and there's nothing greater than him, right? But without him, we are nothing, right? But at the end of the day, he's serving us by giving and providing.
So if you find yourself in either Baltimore or in DC, just in between on the first and third Wednesdays of the month, they don't meet at 7:30. They meet at 7 o'clock. For a lot of us, they have a different Masonic Standard Time at Odenton Lodge, and that's where you will find Worshipful Brother Luis Gonzalez and the Brothers of Odenton 209. Thank you so much for coming on this week, brother.
Oh man, I really appreciate it, brother RC, man. Like this is great. Like I said, man, it's we're a unit. We're really a family. And I think if people approach that mentality that we're really brothers and treat each other like such, and that the temple is a temple, you'll be successful.
If Masonic education is important to you, you can sign up for our email newsletter at craftsmanonline.com. A reminder that new episodes of the Craftsman Online podcast drop every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail. So I gotta find out, when you went to the lodge in New Jersey, the Cuban lodge, and the door opened up and there's the old guys back there playing dominoes and just hanging out, like what word went through your mind in Spanish? You gotta say.
I was like, coño, qué mierda esto. I was like, what is going on here? Dude, they legitimately had like they were literally out there jugando dominó, tomándose cerveza. I'm like, what is going on? Like, but you know what? Mum's the word. And it was surreal, dude.